So my first exposure to The Legend of Zelda was not the video game, but rather the cartoon that everyone apparently hates. It is what it is, but it gave me the bare essentials of Zelda lore, back when it was only a couple of games and not the massive tomb of worship that it has evolved into today. And then a neighbor would introduce me to Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. Anyway, I didn't get to play the original Legend of Zelda until many years later, when I would find a copy of the game on sale secondhand at a convenience store. Funny but true story, the guy who sold me the game warned me that the battery no longer worked and I wouldn't be able to save my games, which explained why it was only for a few bucks. I decided to buy the game anyway, and the clerk, kind soul that he was, offered me a loose copy of Final Fantasy for free that he had on sale. Free copy of Final Fantasy was unheard of in those days, much less today. I bring this story up because I still have that original Zelda cartridge, and as you can see, plain as day, I still have saves on this cart some 20 years later since I first bought the cartridge. Meanwhile, that Final Fantasy game pack that I got for free, that battery died out after a couple playthroughs and the cart soon met a garbage bag in short term. Well, you know, I'd be upset, but I got it for free, so it was no big loss, and I did eventually get another one with a working battery, so whatever. So The Legend of Zelda is the legendary first chapter in a long-running franchise that is often revered and worshipped to the point of it becoming a religion. It's one of, if not the first game to introduce a battery backup component that allowed players to save their progress onto their cartridge, much like the original Famicom Disk System version would accomplish much more easily. It's one of the first games on the platform to offer a player a more expansive world that you could roam around freely and explore, stock up on inventory items through long searches or by purchasing them from a shop. And it's the first NES game cartridge to come in a gold cartridge. It is also a game that has aged very, very poorly. You begin the adventure by putting in a name. Because you don't play as someone named Link, you can give him whatever name you want, have at it. And then you begin by entering this cave and grabbing this wooden sword because it's apparently dangerous to go along. At least that's what this guy says. He seems like a trustworthy fellow. And then you shoot beams with your sword because that's the most sword thing you could do, and then you take a hit and your sword don't do the beam thing anymore, and so on and so forth. So you gather around killing monsters for healing hearts and rupees, which are the currency of Hyrule that you'd use to buy items that aid you in your quest, whether it be a shield to deflect most attacks or a candle that burns certain trees to unveil secret stairways where you have to pay damages, or bombs that can clear up hidden caves where you have to pay damages, and oh, you can also get free money or shops that sell cheaper goods. That's probably why you'd want to venture here, so yeah. All these gathering of assets, whether it be additional tools, stronger weapons, or life-extending heart containers, are key to your ultimate goal in The Legend of Zelda, to seek out the 8 pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom, which is the only means of gaining access to the lair of the evil Ganon, whom you must defeat in order to claim the Triforce of Power and save the Princess Zelda. And then you play the game a second time, but harder and with more devious tricks not introduced the first time around. Each of the 8 Triforce pieces are guarded in dungeons that you have to seek out. Some out in the open, others not so much. Within these dungeons are powerful enemies as well as a special item that you wouldn't find out in the open. A bow to shoot them arrows that cost money to shoot. Well, that was underwhelming. A stepladder to cross small gaps, a wand that shoots magic, a boomerang that stuns enemies, and so on and so forth. These tools are vital to surviving the dangers of the underworld, especially as you come closer to your final challenge. So the big thing with Zelda back in the day was the massive overworld that was available to you to explore, and for the most part, you could go about however you wish, as the good majority of this land could be traversed from the first screen, with only a couple screens requiring a raft to reach. No need for grappling hooks, navigating caves, or clearing blockades. There's a whole world to venture through, and that's before we dive into the secret finding stuff where you bomb rocks to find hidden caves that will yield special shops, special items, a bit of rainy day money, or even fees to pay for the door repair. My favorite of the bunch. In any event, you are left to your own devices as to where to go and how to proceed. A blessing in some ways because you're not bound to some unwritten predetermined path that's scripted out for you that most games would have, but a curse in others because, well, you're left to your own devices on how to proceed and where to go. Which means this eventually becomes what the cool kids like to call a where the fuck do I go kind of game. And while you'd get some hits from the creepy old people who inhabit this barren Hyrule land for better or worse, you were left to figure out things for yourself. Whether it be trying to figure out what master using it so you could switch swords actually means, trying to find the stairs that will lead you to another part of a dungeon, or trying to find the last couple dungeons for that matter. Okay, so folks, I want to digress for a bit here, if you don't mind. So one of the first games I ever got for the NES was the little game called Castlevania II Simon's Quest. You may have heard of this one. It's the one people needed Nintendo Power to beat because the villagers who were supposed to give you hints don't actually give you hints or something to that extent. I am not one of those people. I mostly figured things out on my own, or a buddy would show me the way and he didn't have Nintendo Power either. Either way, I was able to complete Simon's Quest without needing a guide. And then I found out about a tornado that would have made life easier, but that's besides the point. I bring this up because while I was able to figure things out with Simon's Quest, amazingly enough in hindsight, when it came to The Legend of Zelda, I was totally lost. So wait, I gotta burn trees to find shit with this candle. I could only shoot one flame per screen. I gotta waste bombs trying to find an opening that could lead to riches or poverty. What do you mean I need to find stairs to reach this room? Why can't I bomb the wall? So if I touch a gravestone that summons a ghost, fine, how the fuck am I supposed to know one of these gravestones can be pushed and that I could grab the magic sword once I mastered using it? Where the fuck is level 7? Where the fuck is level 8? And so on and so forth. Wasn't until a couple years later that I got my hands on one of those unauthorized strategy guides that I found out you needed to use the recorder, the whistle, on this pond to reveal a set of stairs. So yes, even the mighty Legend of Zelda is prone to helpful hints that aren't all that helpful, even if some of the hints are more helpful than most. Especially in regards to the second quest where they start introducing walls that you could walk through and using the recorder to reveal stairs in places you wouldn't have guessed could be places where you could hide secret stairs with a whistle and... What's this? Lose your money or... What? Okay, fine, digression over. The Legend of Zelda is a plain-looking game, even by the standards of the time. The characters are short and stubby, save for some of the larger boss monsters. You've got a mix of basic yet decent terrain such as rocky rocks and a well-constructed room template for the dungeons to go along with more rudimentary tile-based scenery, such as forests comprising one tree per square. It's easy to look at this now and chuckle at some of the primitiveness of the visuals, but back then, it got the job done. And it didn't take much to see that this was a bat, a skeleton, a little night thing, and so on and so forth. You could make out what things were, and that's pretty much all you could ask for in these older games. Still, even the plain Jane terrain didn't take away from the scope of the game, which was pretty big for the time. And of course you have a majestic opening theme to greet you on the title screen, and a main overworld theme that has since become legendarily recognizable playing throughout your journeys. A simple yet brooding underworld theme for the dungeon levels, simplistic sound effects that were good enough to implement into that one cartoon there, and some primitive attempts at creating monster growls for the bosses, which I thought were kinda cool. Now this pertains to the NES version, which was on a cartridge, but the original version was released onto the Famicom Disk System, which had some extra sound channels that allowed for more digitized samples, which made the title theme sound a bit richer, and the monster growl sound... Holy shit, these sound awful. Thank fuck we didn't get these on the NES, cause that, Jesus Christ. As with most games around these period, the small number of music tracks means the songs get repetitive and the loops aren't particularly long, but that's okay because the tunes are just fine. They'd get better over time, as everything else in this game would be. And that's what it really boils down to at the end of the day. The Legend of Zelda is a product of its era, and a rather ambitious, somewhat revolutionary title for its day. You have a world that's wide and open for you to explore in any way you like. You collect and manage your inventory of weapons and tools for use in the more troublesome spots. There's a sense of gradual progression as you become stronger and more capable of tackling the tougher foes. The battery-powered save function kept track of your adventure, so you could come back to it at a later time. Back in 1986, this was pretty hot shit. Nowadays, however, it doesn't quite hold up. The gameplay and graphics are fairly simplistic, combat is somewhat shoddy, secret hunting by bombing rocks or burning trees gets tiresome after a while, and you'll end up looking up a map to save you the trouble, and always starting a new session with 3 red hearts even after amassing all the heart containers in the game, and having to get those filled every time, that's just needless busy work. The fact that there is no easy means of saving your progress without dying, or invoking some code with a second controller or whatever, Not a fan of that stuff, and it's probably why whenever I play OG Zelda these days, it's usually done through the one fan-made port for PC whose name I'm not going to mention, but those who know what I'm talking about get it, and those who don't worry, you'll find out soon enough thanks to your local internet search engine. Now let me clear something up. This is not a condemnation of The Legend of Zelda. Honestly, no, it has not aged well, as the one Zelda game I go back to the least. But much like the original Metroid, the only reason it's not as good as what came afterwards is only because what came afterwards did it so much better. And when the first game in a long-running series ends up being the weakest entry on official Nintendo hardware, the upside as you go forward is that it can only get better, and it does. A lot of Zelda 1's DNA permeates into all these games, and all these games are as highly regarded as they are because they've had a great base to build upon. For that reason alone, the original Legend of Zelda is a game I feel you should play if you haven't, just to see where it all began, and who knows, you might actually take a liking to it. And there's many ways to do it. The original NES cartridge is still an option, the NES Classic Edition mini console if you could find one, the classic NES series re-release on Game Boy Advance if you could find that, the Zelda's Collector's Edition on GameCube if you could find that, the Nintendo Switch Online Service gimmick, that Game & Watch thing, and also something else. It's one of those games you should try at least once, just to say you did.